Chair O'Donnell.
Call to order the October 21st, 2020 meeting of the Urban Renewal Commission. If you would conduct the roll, please, Ms. Riggs.
Commissioner Doug Neely.
Here.
Commissioner Sean Cross.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
Commissioner Dan Holliday and Commissioner Rachel Lyle Smith are absent this evening, along with Commissioner Rocky Smith and Chair Frank O'Donnell.
Thank you. Do we have any citizen comments which are generally unrelated to the issues on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to discussion items. Item 1 is the election of the vice chair for 2020 with a staff report presented by Mr. Conkle.
It's actually presented by me, but you can call on
Okay.
him.
Oh,
All right.
We
So,
have an upgrade. Ms. Riggs is going to present.
oh, I don't know about that, but so we have the election of the vice chair for 2020. That's something that the commission had agreed to put on hold until we got a full commission. Now that a full commission is seated, that's something you can choose to do at this time, or we do this every January for the new year. You can choose to go ahead and elect one now until January and then elect a new one, or you can wait and just elect one in January. It's up to the commission.
What's the pleasure
Mr.
of the
O'Donnell,
commission?
I would like to, since it has to be a non-commission member, I'd like to nominate Doug Neely to serve as vice chair until the end of the year.
I'd prefer not to at this point since I'm new.
You're not really that new.
I prefer not to at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Neely has declined. Do we have any other nominations?
Well, then I will need to nominate Mr. Cross till the end of the year because it has to be a non-commission member according
Yes,
to
it
our
does.
our
Correct.
rules.
A second on that, or do we need a second on a nomination?
Not on a nomination.
Okay, well then let's simply,
According to Robert's rules, we do.
Okay, well, second, does anybody want to second that?
Second?
there we go.
All
We have
right.
a nomination and a second. We'll call for the.
Do you want to do roll call or you just want to do all in
Let's just
favor?
do it all
Yeah.
in favor.
Aye.
All opposed?
It's only till the end of the year.
All right, we have it done.
Thank you, Sean.
There you go,
Yep.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Second item on the agenda is environmental mitigation banking presentation by Mr. Jerry Herman. Please step to the front and conduct your business.
Either one?
Or both.
No. All right. Thank you for letting us present. And us is the River Assets and Opportunities Task Force, which some of you know about and many of you don't, has met for the last 2 years to try to look at various things along the banks of the Willamette on Oregon City's domain and also up the Clackamas on Oregon City's domain and clear into Clackamas Cove to try to figure out what can be done to solve some issues. The information provided to you tonight was the work of the River Assets Task Force, myself and others, and also you were provided information by your staff, which was very excellent because it updated other areas that I didn't have access to. Mr. Conkle, thank you for doing that. The reason we're here is, reason I'm here, and hopefully a few more people might show up, is that in 2016, we brought an idea forward to the city, a number of officials of the city, John Lewis, Tony Conkle and others, to look at the concept of getting other funding sources flowing into the Cove to solve some of the problems that are not easily solved through strictly the development process. I want to tell you that I found out about this when I was chairman of the Parks and Recreation Committee for Gladstone. And I was amazed to find out that Gladstone was going to get literally millions of dollars of improvements to their landscape provided by others. We can thank President Nixon for this, because way back in 1972, he started a process called the Clean Water Act. Matter of fact, he instituted a whole bunch of environmental initiatives. The Resource Recovery and Recycling Act, which sets standards for cleaning up hazardous waste sites, started the process of recycling and so forth. And the issue is Gladstone was approached by the Lower Harbor Trust Fund. Let me explain that. I sent information to you about all this. John Kitzhaber, our governor at that time, felt the industries in downtown Portland between the Broadway Bridge and the Columbia River, some 15 river miles, were being heavily targeted for environmental cleanup because back in World War II and thereafter, they had done things probably that would not have been allowed, especially in World War II era. There was a need to respond to painting and chemical manufacturing, shipbuilding and everything under the sun. And Kitzhaber saw handwriting on the wall that if it became a Superfund site, that distance between the Broadway Bridge and the Columbia, 15 miles, it would make possibly permanent employment for attorneys because they would be litigating back and forth between the EPA and others instead of solving the problems. So he established the Lower Harbor Trust Fund.
Carol, if I may counsel you, the meat and potatoes that matters tonight is how does it work? How do we get in the queue? How do we do things? Who becomes a mitigation banker? Try to drive home the logistics of
Okay.
how do we accomplish this and who does it and who from the city would stand in?
All right.
And how do we
Thank you,
cash in on those
Thank you, Mr.
credits?
Chairman. I was trying to give you the background
I
just for
understand
setting
the
the
history.
tone. So, as in the case of Gladstone, I'll use that as an example. Gladstone did not have a developer for the 50-some acres of lands that were targeted. They simply joined into a relationship with a bank that basically gave money if it would solve environmental problems. It's a restoration banking system that then the city interfaced with professionals that were paid for by that bank to do their due diligence, figure out what projects would work, what would not. And the result was then those professionals that had been involved in assessing and determining what they thought would work, who also had to convince the regulatory people, this is important, the regulatory people, Fish and Wildlife and others, National Marine Fisheries, they all have a say in this. Those professionals have a relationship with that level of environmental evaluation by agencies. Those agencies then said, we like the ideas for what you're proposing in Gladstone, do it. In the case of Oregon City, that process started for you in 2016. The city established at least a working small group to look at the concept. Initial assessment agreement was produced and signed in 2019, about a year and a half ago, and that set the stage for RestoreCap, which was the bank that represented the trust fund of all these industries in Portland that were paying into a trust fund to solve problems, to then begin that process of seeing what was feasible in Oregon City. The interesting thing was that the city spent $50,000 on this document, the water quality assessment, which already has done much of the work of establishing what are the priorities for Clackamas Cove. You all know that the cove has been listed as a non-human contact waterway, at least in September, August and September, because of water quality issues related to algal blooms. This did a lot of the work, and you paid for it by the professionals that work for RestoreCap. That set the stage for other things to happen, so part of the work has already been done. Now, to make it sounds complicated, but the issue is, I want to go back to Gladstone for just a moment. The work got done at Rynearson Wetlands. John Runyon will talk to this point. He was in charge of that whole project for Cascade Environmental Services, his company. They were the ones that managed all the on-site work. They're the ones that made sure the work was done to the quality the city wanted, and also especially the agencies. And ultimately, that project then received maintenance funds every year. Matter of fact, in perpetuity. I mean, 10 to 15 or 20 years. I don't know that number as well as John does. These sites, once they're done, have to be maintained to the quality of wildlife purposes. What kind of projects are available? The cove has got water quality problem. We talked about that. It has areas around the cove that are never going to be addressed or were not going to be addressed by the various due diligence agreements you had with the previous developer. Those areas are the areas that would be targeted, including the water quality issue. The city, with Nancy Kresher leading the effort in 2005 or 6, about that time, worked to try to get a permit to do dredging and create an opening to the cove for water quality exchange. The tide would come in and sweep water in there, the tide would go out. That kept the cove healthy. Well, that gravel bar has since filled up. That kind of project is a water quality project that is eligible. The city went to, and Doug Neely and myself did this, to Clackamas County to seek their help to get that permit for the dredging permit from the United States Corps of Engineers. That permit was granted after a significant effort on Doug and myself and other people's efforts, and that set in motion for that channel to be done. Why isn't it done? Because partners were needed to look at that business of what's it gonna cost to get that done. I don't know the latest figures, but one way or the other, water quality still drives a lot of the decisions. I would really like to have you talk to John Runyon for a moment, if you don't mind. I don't know how you're gonna do that on his Zoom, because he knows a lot of these details. The city of Milwaukee is now in the queue to receive funding. We didn't move forward at this point, and so Milwaukee wants funding too. There's quite a bit of funding available. Is there some way John can
I'm
help?
fine with, let me speak as chair. I'm fine with Mr. Runyon speaking. I think the items that I'd like to see him pay attention to, and please, fellow commissioners, join in. Who would serve as our mitigation banker? You know, can the city itself or urban renewal agency serve as a banker? Who does that?
Okay,
How do we get in line, stay in line, and gain access to these funds?
okay. All right.
And who can provide a list of mitigation projects that would be eligible? How do we pursue them?
All right.
What are our next steps is what I
Okay.
want to know.
Okay, thank you very much. The next steps are building upon this document, which was the water quality study that looked at all the landscape issues that need attention, that the developer was not going to do.
Okay.
And including ones that, if there is no developer, that could still be done with mitigation funds. The
And who-
city would have to establish.
If there's no developer, who is the point of contact for the city? Is the city their own banker or?
Well,
John
okay,
Runyon's
the
company
bank
banker?
is represented by Restore Cap, works with the bank that has the money and funnels the money from the Lower Harbor Trust Fund to these various projects. That relationship is between Restore Cap at this time and also the representatives that work for Restore Cap, including John Runyon, who works on the professional level. The interface here would have to be with some of your staff. Your staff are very capable. John Lewis, as an example, I don't know how much time Tony has to put into this effort, but one or two points of contact here is the same thing that Gladstone did. One or two points of contact, they would meet regularly, the funds would flow into the project. I don't know how much of the funds actually flowed to the city initially, but they flowed into doing the work, getting the work done to the cities and the agency's standards. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think, I agree with you. Let's let Mr. Runyon walk us through the mechanics of this, because
Thank
that's
you.
what we want to know. Who, what, when, where, how, and why. Let's go with that. Mr. Runyon, the chair recognizes you if you can be heard.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. For the record, my name is John Runyon. I am a principal with Cascade Environmental Group, a small consulting firm based out of Portland. One thing that I want to correct with Jerry's testimony is that there is not a Portland Harbor Trust Fund. What there is there are liabilities in Portland Harbor that are twofold. First is for the cleanup. And so the various industrial polluters that historically were working in the harbor are responsible for the cleanup. The other aspect of it, which gets to mitigation, is they have to pay for past damages for fish and wildlife harm. So if fish and wildlife were harmed by their activities, they need to purchase credits from a mitigation bank developer for those liabilities. So essentially they have a ledger that says you have X number of liabilities and it's accounted for in a certain currency for mitigation. And then they go to a mitigation banker and they say, we will buy credits from you because you can address those liabilities of environmental harm. So that's the way it works. And the best example, as Jerry pointed out, is the city of Gladstone. They were approached by a mitigation banker that I was working with at the time, Falling Springs. They went to the city and said, we can improve your Reinerson Natural Area where there's a small dam and other features. We can improve the environmental baseline there and then sell credits or credits can be purchased by the potentially responsible parties in Portland Harbor that will pay for the construction, the ongoing management, the management over a 10-year period, and then establishing a stewardship fund that would go into perpetuity to maintain the site. So that's one project. The other project with City of Gladstone that I was also involved in was our client was the Port of Portland. They are a potentially responsible party. They had cleanup activities in the harbor. They had some damages to aquatic resources. So we worked with them in Meldrum Bar Park in the Doll Beach area to remove some pavement there, improve fish habitat, and then remove the decaying bulkhead from the bank of the Willamette River with improved riparian habitat, that sort of thing. So the Port of Portland paid for all that. They also provided reimbursement funding to the city directly for engaging in that process. So tonight I'm representing Restercap and their interest in Clackamas Cove. And the way this process works is the mitigation banker is responsible for evaluating the site, for coming up with a plan that meets with agency approval. It's a long process. It usually takes 2 to 3 years. Once agency approval is granted, then they have the right, in an entrepreneurial sense, to sell credits to potentially responsible parties. There is the potential that we could tap into other mitigation markets. For example, wetland mitigation is another area that potentially we could sell credits. So if someone in Oregon City, for example, has an impact on a wetland, they could come to Clackamas Cove and purchase from Restercap credits to handle that wetland impact. So in a simple way, that's the way it works. To develop this, we would need to have close contact with both the city and with the developer, because the development plan needs to be integrated in with any kind of habitat restoration activities that you do out there. It's a challenging site to build on. It's a challenging site to do any kind of mitigation on, but we're still evaluating the feasibility there. We had an agreement with the city that expired. I think potentially we're interested in another agreement with the city. But if we don't move forward as a mitigation banker, there are other mitigation bankers out there that you could potentially engage with that could evaluate and potentially bankroll a mitigation site in Clackamas Cove.
Quick question, can it move forward in the absence of a developer?
Yes, it can move forward in the absence of developer because it's city-owned property, you control it.
Okay, if you proceed with the mechanics, so that's exactly what we want to hear. So Restorecap, currently their role is acting as mitigation bankers in these relationships. Is that a correct statement or
Yes,
incorrect?
they currently have a mitigation bank in Portland Harbor, and they're currently developing other mitigation banks throughout Oregon.
Okay, and we could proceed in the absence of a developer. How would that work, or how, if you'd like to take us through the process some more, please do.
So the way the process would work is we would have an agreement with the city, very similar to the previous agreement, that basically says that Restercap can evaluate the project. If they determine it's feasible, then they basically have the first right of entry into that project. They have to determine that it's feasible, that it's financially profitable for them, and ultimately the city could benefit from an arrangement similar to what the city of Gladstone did, where a portion of the profits are shared with the city. And or if you have a need for credits, let's say you're doing some activities in the river, or you have a need for wetland credits, there could be a deal swung in return for the mitigation bank on your property that you could receive credits in return.
Has the feasibility of the code project ever been determined?
We started down that pathway. It's a challenging site. We're looking at fill material that we can place in there, because what you want to do is create shallow water wetlands, essentially. That's what's good for fish and water quality. You need fill to do that because the material in the cove is very coarse and not really suitable for that. And that's where integration with the development can be important. If they're excavating material that then we can also place in a cut fill balance approach, there's lots of potential for that. But we don't have to have a developer to move forward because it's city-owned property.
What would be the cost of
I've lost my hand here, so I'll
I'm
resist
sorry,
it.
I've been watching him, go ahead.
Yeah, on the, on the fill aspect, I mean, when we do developments, we have to do cut and fill, not to change basically the water capacity. I assume when you're talking about fill, something has to happen someplace else. Because you're actually.
Yes, that's why it ultimately have to be integrated in with the development, exactly.
Yeah.
This is one of the challenges with the feasibility part of this.
Who bears the initial cost, and has any of that portion been paid as of this date by our prior actions?
So the cost is borne by the mitigation banker, in this case, Cap. So far, they've been paying the bills, they've been paying for my time, other contractors' time to evaluate the code previously.
Mr. Kunkel, do you want to join the conversation anytime with the knowledge that you have? Because I'm just trying to get an understanding of it. Okay.
Not at this point. I think it's more of just an opportunity for the Urban Renewal Commission to ask questions. And then I think once we decide, trying to figure out what we do next, I think, probably be a good time for me to have a little input.
Yeah, it appears it's best tied to development that's underway, but
But it's not absolutely
not
necessary.
necessary. And your organization, Restore Cap, essentially functions at the bank, as the banker. My understanding is you essentially, you buy the credits from us and then resell them. It's actually almost like a stock market exchange. The value of those can go up and go down. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is a market for them and the value can go up and down. And it's a, entrepreneurial, speculative process on the part of the banker. They have no guarantees, absolutely no guarantees that they can sell the credits. Obviously, they do their due diligence. They look at the market. And our take of the lower, of the Willamette market, and I'm speaking broadly in terms of that as a watershed area, is that there's going to be growing need for a range of credits, not only Portland Harbor Superfund, but wetland credits and other river credits for non-Superfund impacts. So for example, if someone builds a dock out into the river, they'll need to mitigate for that, and they could come to Clackamas Cove and Cap and potentially purchase mitigation bank credits for that. Similarly, if the city's got a process where you may have some impacts, as part of the exchange for using land, Cap could potentially provide you with those credits at no cost or minimal cost.
And where is Cap at this point in time in their evaluation of this site as a productive site to engage in this process with us?
Well, we've been on a pause for a while now because the city agreement expired. And quite frankly, they have kind of moved on and they're looking at other sites. My mission tonight is to, explore this with you. I'm not guaranteeing that Cap will want to continue with this process, given that they're looking at other potential lower Portland Harbor sites, as well as other mitigation sites in the area. With that said, Clackamas Cove is, as I know it now, still in the mix potentially for Cap to evaluate.
And what would be our first steps to get in this line to be eligible for these funds?
Well, your first step would be to have an agreement with Cap or another mitigation bank developer to evaluate the site and to move the ball forward by engaging the agencies. That was a step that we have not been able to do, was sort of an initial engagement with the agencies to say, what do you think about conceptually this as a mitigation site? If they check off on that, which we would know probably within 6 months or so, then the pathway would be clear for further refinements in the design and ultimately implementing the bank. And obviously we would need to work closely with the city. It's your property. And we would want to develop a vision for the bank, because it's more than just a mitigation bank. This is habitat. It creates hopefully an attractive area. It will create, improve the aesthetics of the cove. And I think working with the city on a broad sort of vision for what they want the development and the mitigation bank to look like, because all of that is integrated together in the context of the landscape that surrounds Clackamas Cove.
As a result of your prior contractual experience with us now expired, have you gathered enough information to make those first steps in proposing potential projects to pursue this, or do we have to start at some different point?
No, I think where we are is we're close to the conceptual point, or we have conceptual ideas of what we can do out there, and the next step would be to check in with the agencies as well as a check-in with the broader community. Is this what the community wants to see out there in terms of the big picture? And ultimately, we're also ready for that next step of integrating that, the mitigation bank, the improved habitat with the development.
So in terms of ongoing cost or outlay by the city, do you foresee something that would become immediately necessary? Would it be another agreement with compensation to your company, or what would it be?
It'd be another agreement. The previous agreement did not have any compensation to the company. It was just basically an agreement that said that ResCap could move forward and evaluate the site. And so there's no money exchange at all, and I don't anticipate that would happen.
Because we know for a fact that water quality is an issue down there, ongoing. So, Mr. Conkle, did you want to comment?
Just had a couple of questions, if I could ask Mr. Runyon real quick. Do you know so Gladstone had kind of two different models. One was a mitigation bank with a banker, and one was the Port of Portland had to mitigate. So the Port of Portland was out looking for sites to do mitigation work, and Gladstone happened to be one that fit what they needed. Is that accurate?
Correct. And I was actually working with Gladstone at the time, and I was the connection that basically helped them identify those sites and then bring it to the Port of Portland. That is direct mitigation, where an entity has an impact and then they go and they address that impact, they fund it, as opposed to a mitigation bank where you come and purchase credits.
So the second option that Gladstone had is the mitigation bank model. Did they do an RFP or did they sole source that contract out? Do you know?
I was involved from the beginning in that project, and I actually developed the agreement with the city. That was not a contract. They were approached by Falling Springs and then engaged them, and the result was the contract, which is part of your meeting materials. And then Falling Springs went forward, constructed the site, and now they're in, oh gosh, like the fourth or fifth year of monitoring on the site.
So has that project been financially successful for them? Have they sold the credits? Have they?
So that is confidential information. I will say from my take of the market is that yes, it has been profitable for them.
Okay, so I guess, could you talk a little bit? So did Gladstone, I can't remember, I read through it real quick. They were gonna end up with essentially some money set aside for, upkeep of that area. Is that kind of, if I'm recalling correctly?
So the city benefits in really three ways. The first is they get the immediate improvements on the site. There were poor water quality there. We removed a small dam, removed invasive species. It's really quite an attractive area now, and they have a trail actually that goes in there. So the city benefits from the ecological uplift of the site. The second area where the city benefits is in terms of long-term stewardship. The mitigation banker is responsible for maintaining the site and meeting very, very rigorous biological and physical benchmarks along the way, performance criteria along the way. They have to meet the performance criteria to release credits, so they're really incentivized to do that. They're responsible for that for 10 years. If at 10 years the bank and the vegetation and the habitat are established and meet the criteria that is set up by the government agencies, then RestorCap basically steps aside. They identify a long-term steward that can then maintain the site in perpetuity. And RestorCap, or in this case, Falling Springs, provides an endowment that pays for those maintenance activities into the future. So that's the second way the city benefits. The final way the city benefits is they get half of the profits from the operation of the mitigation bank once all of the expenses are accounted for. And I don't know how that arrangement has worked with the city. I haven't followed up with them because I'm no longer a consultant for Falling Springs. But ultimately, that could be very lucrative in the terms of millions of dollars for the city.
But you don't know if Gladstone's been paid anything as part of that part of the deal of the share. So essentially, I think if I read that correctly, is that the mitigation banking company and the city would split the profits 50-50 once the mitigation banking company had been recouped all their expenses, all their investment, all their engineering fees, set up the monitoring and the endowment. So essentially, and I don't know if there's a profit margin built in there, I assume that there is. And then at that point, there is a splitting of any profit above and beyond that 50-50, I think is what that agreement was.
Yes, that's correct.
And are those proceeds from the sale of those credits, are they dictated to be spent in any certain way by a city?
I doubt it.
No.
Okay.
There's no constraints on what the developer, the mitigation
Okay.
banker does.
All right. I've actually allocated 15 minutes for the presentation and probably another 15 for Q&A, which I think we're approaching the end. I don't want to cut it short prematurely, but I guess my next question would be both to you, Mr. Runyon, and to our city manager. What would be our next steps should we choose to pursue this?
The next step would be to develop an agreement similar to the previous agreement with RestoCap.
Okay. And that would take direction from us to the city manager, which you currently do not have.
Right, and I think, you're well aware of the work that we're doing right now as it relates to the public engagement as to the future of the urban renewal district.
Yes.
And I don't, that's a policy discussion for the Urban Renewal Commission to determine, is this something that we move forward with now? Is it something that we involve in this public process? Is it something that we address during our goal setting as we're rolling into our next 2-year budget cycles? I mean, and there are options there.
Okay. Recognizing Mr. Neely.
Yeah, what, was there cost to the city or the urban renewal district and under the previous agreement?
Well, there are indirect costs. There's my time, there's attorney time. Those are indirect costs. Was there additional direct investment to the consultant above and beyond what we paid the $50,000 for the water quality report? I don't believe so. But there was the, essentially the staff time that goes into negotiating, prepping, preparing, bringing that to you. So it's not, I agree with Mr. Runyon. Yeah, we're not paying the consultants for the work. There are costs that would be billed to the urban renewal district to bring this to you to consider.
And Mr. Runyon, from your experience, what resources do you need if you were to enter into an agreement with the city in terms of city resources or other resources? In the event you weren't able to hear that, the question was to Mr. Runyon, what resources would you need in terms of city staff or other resources not noted?
Oh, that was addressed to me. Sorry about that.
Yes, it was.
So we would need a key contact with the city. We would obviously need to understand what is moving forward with the development. I'm pretty much cut out of the loop on that. I haven't been engaged in that in quite a while. So what's the vision for the area? But primarily we would need a point of contact with the city that we could work with. It's hard to predict what kind of resources we would need. I don't think they would be substantial in terms of staff time, but it's hard to predict, all of that, given that there could be some discoveries along the way that would require more city staff time to, assist us in our due diligence.
Does anyone else on this commission have any further questions or comments, sir?
My only question really was the previous agreement with the city or with the Urban Renewal Commission? And what's more beneficial would be to have it with the city, which is going to be on forever?
Yeah,
Or
it was with the Urban Renewal Commission because they own the property.
Okay.
That's in question, that was gonna be the potential mitigation bank areas. So the agreement was with the Urban Renewal Commission and then, the Cove LLC. It was a 3-way agreement.
Okay.
Because they were gonna do the development of the upland area. There was the potential for mitigation banking restoration work along the shoreline, up a little bit of upland habitat, but then potential in-water work as well. And then essentially that whole cove area where the agreement with RestoreCap was to look was owned by the Urban Renewal Commission at that point. So the agreement was with them. You could imagine a situation though where it would transfer probably in the future, depending on the ownership makeup of that property.
And at this point, I'd like to open it up to anyone for closing statements. I think we've got an understanding of how to proceed. If we care to proceed, we don't have that direction at this point. If Mr. Herman would like to make any closing statements, or Mr. Runyon, I'd invite you to do so. Mr. Herman.
Let me just do the best I can to summarize. The project the opportunity here is an opportunity that puts the city in a queue for other resources. As John Runyon pointed out, Port of Portland funded directly improvements in Gladstone because it was easier than going through the mitigation bank, or that was their choice. So it wants to run the queue in this kind of thinking to solve the environmental challenges and create recreational benefits and make the area more pleasant. There's other resources that begin to become available too. There's the other one is brownfield funding. We haven't even talked about that. Anyone thinks that the cove is just pristine is wrong. It's an industrial site, and it still has things occasionally that cause the developers great concerns, such as phase one development of those apartments. There was a lot of problems they ran into trying to move soil that was heavily contaminated and build it up. So we're in the queue in this type of thinking. It sets in motion other resources that can come our way. One thing that wasn't discussed here, I want to point out, is a theme. Milwaukee, I understand, is developing a theme because they want a theme to deal with Kellogg Basin and Kellogg Creek and the removal of a small dam that has never worked very well in Fishway. And their theme is basically a stewardship and improvement kind of theme. There is a resident and his wife that live in phase one. His name is Gary Spanovich. His wife is a direct descendant of Frederick Law Olmsted, who planned all the great parks in our nation, including Central Park. And their thinking was, there are now residents of phase one. They love that area down there. Gary's not able to get around as well as his wife, but that an overall theme of blessing people through the built environment and the natural environment, really, which is what that area is, could be a theme that even attracts more interest. Lastly, I'd like to say, I've been looking at this issue of water quality going in and out, and the tide can't go in, or if it's a high tide, it can, but then it can't go out. The channel that was originally designed, and Mr. Conkle knows this, was 7 feet deeper than low water to get deep draft vessels in there. Well, there's a problem at Clackamas Park boat ramp that has to be solved before the ever deep draft vessel could get in there. There's a huge amount of coarse material that could do at least the underpinnings of some of the things Mr. Runyon was talking about to set the shallow water environments. That gravel could be used internally in the cove. It was to be disposed of, if you can believe this, in the Willamette River, in the navigation channel. That was the conditions of the permit because nobody knew what to do with it. The cove is a logical place.
That has value only in that, would that be a viable project that would qualify us to get in line and stay in line? That's what we're talking about. What does it take to get in line, stay in line, and be eligible for these funds? And that's the focus of tonight's conference. And that may be an option that Mr. Runyon can comment further. So I don't want to take up too much time tonight. We have other matters. I don't think we've cut it too short. I think we've gained the knowledge we need. I appreciate you coming forward, Mr. Runyon. I appreciate your attendance and input is valuable. And we can have further discussions and determine where we go from here. But first, I need to recognize Mr. Doug Neely.
For Mr. Runyon, the fact that we're in a tidal area, does that have possibilities for us for securing funds, whether it be from what has to be done in terms of other things on the Willamette River?
Yes, the fact that you are tidal actually is what qualifies you to potentially sell credits for the Portland Harbor Superfund site, because all of those credits have to be within the influence of the Willamette River. The fact that it is tidal, it's within the influence of the Willamette River. One of the things that we see is that looking into the foreseeable future, there's going to be other river impacts out there from transportation, infrastructure, from new docks, from other development, and there will be increasing demand for those credits. And ultimately, to get you into the queue for all this is quite simply signing an agreement with the mitigation banker. It doesn't have to be RestorCap necessarily, that will engage with the broader Portland Harbor process, engage with the agencies that are involved with mitigation, and move the project forward in collaboration with the city. I agree with Jerry that there's a need for a comprehensive vision there that integrates in the habitat improvements from mitigation with the development, because I think you can create an aesthetically attractive area there that is a huge, huge benefit to the city, that has birds, that has wildlife, that has improved water quality, that is swimmable, if you move forward and embrace a comprehensive vision.
A follow-up question, if I may. We've got the Abernathy Bridge project that's going to probably evolve at one point or another. Are there going to be mitigation requirements on that project that could be obtained?
Were you able to hear that question?
Yes. My understanding is that they will have mitigation. I don't know if they've looked into mitigation options. This is another reason why you want to get in the queue, because there are credits that are being produced right now. There are credit needs that are being developed out there, and you know, lost time is lost opportunity.
So if I understand correctly, there will be no cash outlay in terms of direct costs, but there would be indirect costs by our staff in support of your efforts as first steps.
Correct.
Okay. Any final questions or comments?
Commissioner McGriff.
Commissioner McGriff.
John, can you, just briefly talk about what the involvement would be of the, Division of State Lands and the EPA in set a project of this type?
Oh, the Division of State Lands would be intimately involved, because they would look at fill and removal of material out there, whether we're creating true environmental uplift, and ultimately the permitting pathway has to go through DSL. The EPA would probably be less involved. They were directly involved with the Melbourne Bar Park project, the Gulf Beach project, because that was impacts to the river corridor. If we sell credits that are for direct river impacts, and these are credits separate from wetland credits, these are credits that are separate from Portland Harbor Superfund. They're what are called Section 404, U.S. Code, Section 404, river mitigation credits, then the EPA would get involved.
Thank you. Mr.
And
Conklin,
just-
did you? I'm
had
sorry,
one-
you had additional?
Yeah, sorry, I had one, follow-up. So it was briefly mentioned that there was an attempt to, breach where the bar, the sand has gone up and, closed off the cove and then caused issues with the water quality and all that. So do you think that I understand from some years back, there was an objection by DSL to opening that up. And I don't know, the people come and go in those agencies, so I don't know where the stance is, on that at this point in time. And is that a project that could be part of this as well?
Well, I think your permit is still effective in terms of removing gravel from the mouth of the cove. I know that some agencies are worried about impacts on fish. I'm not sure that it would be a long-term proposition to continue to excavate at the mouth of the cove. But you're absolutely right. You'd have to engage DSL to determine if that was feasible.
Thank you so much.
Nothing further?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Final statements, closing statements?
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for coming forward. Thank you to both of you gentlemen.
All right.
Thank you.
The final item on tonight's discussion items.
I guess is this something we want to think about? Want to kind of think about what you've heard tonight, revisit this in a month, revisit this in 2 months, revisit it when we have more people here?
I don't want it to fall off the
Radar.
radar, the chart. I think it's something that we can, look into, and I think it's a viable, way of getting some improvements, some public amenities that we had talked about previously with the Cove. And I know at this point in time, we don't have a project or a project developer, but we still have on the books, I believe, the whole idea of having the park there and the amphitheater. And I think that is something that's worthwhile to look into and see if there's a way that we could begin to work on that particular project. I know that was something that members of the community expressed to me, that they were very excited about that. And I thought that was a great addition to a project, and it could be a great addition to a project that we work on in the future.
Is this something that maybe that I bring back in December? We can think about it, have the whole commission here. I mean, because I'm not sure how, I don't know how much time we want to spend talking about, how does this relate to the other work that we're doing within the district? That seems like a larger conversation about the public engagement, the work that we're doing there.
I think it's part of it.
Part of that process?
will be if we decide we want to have a project. So I think December's fine. I mean, it's okay with me.
It's okay, I mean, quite honestly, we were, in our last venture, water quality was of utmost concern, and the attractiveness of the cove would be so much enhanced if the water quality was enhanced, whether swimming, fishing, recreational use, and it would, and it was one of the concerns of the developer. So if we could take steps to maybe move forward in that, I would definitely support it. Now, if you would like the full commission, yeah, I'm fine with that, but I don't see any downside to beginning the exploration of it.
I don't either.
And, additional conversations maybe with Mr. Runyon and Jerry, and
Well,
what does it take to move it forward? And in what
I
form?
guess I'd prefer to come back and think
Yeah,
about that. Do
that's
we
fine.
want to do an RFP? Are we going to sole source this?
Well,
You know,
let's bring
I
it
think there are
back.
some of those questions.
Well, let's put that before the full
Yeah.
commission, let them vote as to how we proceed.
And then you could put together a list of, here's what we need to consider. I know that there's a lot of interest in the cove being used for non-motorized boating. And because having the motor boats in there, boats with motors, causes some environmental problems that would be not so good down the line. So yeah, I'm okay with us starting to talk about it in terms of, we have a lot of questions we need to answer. And you've already listed like 3 of them in your summation right there. So that's something we do need to be thinking about, and I think we need to keep it in the back of our minds and not let this go, because I think, as Mr. Runyon said, there's an opportunity there to be had, and I'd hate for us to,
I want to get in line.
yeah, get in line.
Comments from other commission members?
Okay, so start to think about some of the policy discussions that we need to have and bring this back in December.
That'd be fine.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. We'll move on to the final item, which is the Oregon City Urban Renewal Study Update. Mr. Graham.
Thank you. James Graham here, Economic Development Manager, Oregon City. At our last meeting, Urban Renewal Committee, Commission meeting, October 7th, members of the Urban Renewal Commission requested an update from Leland Consulting Group and wanted to know what name and branding would be utilized to promote and identify the public engagement component. Now, members of the commission, Urban Renewal Commission, generally concurred to have the Leland Group come back on October 21st, which is today, for an update. And so we welcome Sam Brookham, who is from Leland Consulting Group, as well as Anais Mathis, I think, from 3J Consulting, and they will make a presentation to you.
Very good. Proceed.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Excuse me as I adjust my camera. My first question is, presumably the commission has the ability to see a screen if we share
Yes, we do.
our screen.
I should let
Okay,
Katie answer
excellent.
that.
So
but
let me
yes,
start.
we do.
Let me start with that. Okay, can everybody see this?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. So to start off, right off the bat and answer your the first question that James just mentioned, in terms of project name and branding, the team got together with James and Tony and agreed to a name that would differentiate this project from the other more vision-based projects that are currently happening, including the Economic Development Strategic Plan and the comprehensive planning effort as well. So rather than going for something like Oregon City Futures, for example, which I know is the name of a previous urban renewal project, we landed on simply Oregon City Urban Renewal Study. And in our eyes, that is the way, in a good, effective way in communicating exactly what this is in a neutral manner, and maintaining that level of objectivity, and at the same time differentiating it from those other studies. Okay, so I'm going to move on with what we wanted to present to you through the next half hour, however long we've got. So there's three primary things here. I'm going to take the lead on the first, and then I'm going to hand off to Anais, and I will be talking to you a little bit about the stakeholder interviews that we're conducting, including who they are and what we're asking. Anais will then take you through some of the community meeting components, as well as the materials that were, I believe, included in your meeting packet as well. So just a quick reminder in terms of this project, much of this community engagement is happening up front. It's pretty condensed. We've got a lot of stuff going on, a lot of moving parts, and the stakeholder interviews are the first piece of that, followed by community group presentations and town halls, which will be led by members of the commission, but we'll be there to assist also. The community workshop, of course, is happening next week, and Anais will talk a little bit more about that. Again, this is just the outreach activities we're going through. Commission meetings are obviously part of one of them right now, and I won't dwell on this too long. But one other thing that pops up here is the online surveys, and I'll defer to Anais to talk a little bit more about that. But we will be accompanying some of these other events with those online surveys to supplement that information. So in terms of stakeholder interviews and the groups that we're meeting with, the impacted taxing districts are the first group that Andy Parks of Andy Parks of GEL, Oregon, and myself with Leland Consulting Group will be undertaking. 3J will largely be undertaking the interviews with the community groups, and I'll talk to you a little bit about who that is in a second. And then obviously the general public is the broader public, stakeholders in their own right, but not necessarily those that would fit within one of these other categories. And we will include much of the outreach and target outreach to the general public to direct them to participate in some of these other meetings, such as the community groups. So the overlapping taxing districts that I'm currently scheduling, and we should have the vast majority, if not all of them, completed in the next 2 weeks, include the Clackamas County Community College, the Clackamas County government that we're doubling up with vector control as well, as they are under the government, county government structure, Clackamas Fire District, the Oregon City School District, and Metro and the Port of Portland, who have a minor impact to the district, but impact nonetheless. So there's 5 groups there. Again, we'll have those completed in the next 2 weeks, and in a second, I'll just give you a quick overview of what we plan to ask them, and the topics of discussion and what we hope to achieve. In terms of the community groups, there are 5 key community groups. One of those is the school district, which is going to be handled within the taxing district. So there's opportunity to bring in a couple of others as well. But primarily it's Planning Commission, the Oregon City Business Alliance, Oregon City Chamber of Commerce, and Downtown Oregon City Association. Our thoughts here are essentially that each one of those have a particular interest in the district, and we'd love to know exactly what that is.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask Sam a question?
Sure.
So
Question?
before you get to the question, Sam, could you go back to the list? So when you say Oregon City School District on the left side, are you talking about the staff? Or on the right side, in terms of community group, are you talking about the district board? Because it's definitely a difference. The elected school board.
Yeah, and Yeah, so we're primarily talking about staff in terms of the taxing districts, and that was one of the questions we were going to pose to that particular district in terms of whether, when and how, or whether we should be meeting with the board as well.
So let me follow up with that. So why are you going to ask them that? I think you should meet with the school board. I know that they're very interested in that, and a couple of school board members have already reached out to me. I mean, they don't even know they're a community group yet, but they've expressed some interest. So I would just tell the school district staff that you would like to meet with the board. I'm not sure you're asking, not gonna ask them for permission, just say, I think it's important as a community group that you meet with whoever you can from the elected board.
I would strongly support that approach.
And one quick question.
Mr. Neely.
And the actual revenue to the school district goes to the state, not to the Urban Renewal
Right.
Agency, isn't that right? It's not one of the entities that contributes to the Urban Renewal Commission.
But that's the
I-
myth that's
I-
out there, that urban
yeah.
renewal takes money away from the schools, and they get their money for a completely different source.
I would think that discussion is one of those key points that needs to be clarified, because then you start talking about pools of money and if there's any impact on the pool of money and then the indirect, that's exactly the type of question we want addressed. So I strongly agree, following Commissioner McGriff's suggestion to speak with those people.
Oh, yeah.
I also strongly suggest that you read the voters pamphlet that was the subject of this action last time and look at who published there. And I strongly suggest that you engage the most vocal opponents of urban renewal. Because quite honestly, you might find that they're not totally opposed to it, they're just opposed to it in its present form and usage. And I know he doesn't mind me mentioning by name, former Mayor John Williams would be a good one to speak to. And I'm sure he'd be more than happy. And it would be very revealing. His position would be very revealing and one that needs to be addressed.
I would concur with that as well.
I have a second by Commissioner McGriff.
I've indicated to.
Yeah, thanks.
I've indicated to Mr. Williams that I fully expect him to be involved in this process. So that, I will just get that out there, that is my level of expectation.
Yep, same here.
Thank you very much. And we've had those internal discussions as well in having these established community groups and districts, but also having that direct targeted outreach to the most vocal opponents of urban renewal as it currently stands, to really identify what the issues and the questions and concerns are, to build that holistic understanding. So that is something that we are looking to do, either through direct one-on-one interviews or as a direct targeted invite to one of our events.
I think that would be great, because I remember when I was on the planning commission, someone from Clackamas Fire District came and they were quite vocal about the fact, well, you're doing this and it's taking money away from us. And I'm thinking, you have your own bond measure here that you're getting funds from. So I am hoping that in the process of talking to folks that we're also going to do a little education. And again, I would also add, you're going to talk to the Clackamas Community College. So again, they have an elected board as well as their staff. So I'm hoping we're going to get a broader perspective. You know, nothing wrong with staff, but there are two sides to that coin in terms of these boards that do have elected folks. And particularly the community college and the school district, I'm hoping you'll be able to talk to, maybe a couple of their board members or whoever might be interested. So that's just kind of, maybe it's a little more work, but I think you're broadening your scope. We don't often get to hear from the school board members themselves. We hear from the staff a lot. And sometimes those are not the same viewpoints.
And I do think it would serve you well, some of these key speakers, the most vocal opponents, if they're just a part of a larger group, you'll get a much more productive, larger group interaction if you can deal with these folks individually and get their perspective. And just a suggestion. Do you have anything further, Mr. Brookham, or someone else is up
Who's
next?
going to give us the questions?
Go ahead and proceed.
Thank you very much. That's really useful information. Thank you very much. Sorry, I brought a spreadsheet up in the middle of that, but it was my interview tracking spreadsheet. So I was just diving into who among these people we will be meeting with, and particularly I think the fire district. We have something scheduled for the fire district, and that's with the board of directors as well. So that's happening naturally, and so I will continue to push to include board members in those interviews as well.
And if you have any trouble, just let us know. We'll help.
Great, thank you. So a quick note about the other two bullets on there, which is the neighborhood associations and the PHT, which is the comp plan group. Neighborhood associations and some of those other stakeholders in the Oregon City 2040 path, our goal there is to extend invitations and be deliberate about our invitations beyond just general marketing efforts to those groups, to things like the community meeting, to the two town halls. So we really do get a diverse array of the community as well.
Do you use any of the social media? Like we have Oregon City Chit Chat up here. It has tremendous exposure. Do you utilize those avenues?
So Annie will talk a little bit about how we're marketing and talk in the discussion of the community meeting. So I'll hold off on responding, but in short, yes.
Just one last point, I think one of the things that
Yes.
my fellow commissioners are interested in too is that for some of the community groups, we get the same two people all the time. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm really hoping we can get a little bit broader perspective. And I don't know I know that they have on the chamber, there's a board, but they also have a governmental affairs committee that may be of interest. Oregon City Business Alliance, I know they have an executive board, but I don't know how many members that is. We generally hear from just a couple of them all the time, so maybe reaching out to some of those other board members, whoever they may be.
I'd actually join in on that. You have listed the Downtown Oregon City Association, known as DOCA. They customarily, in pre-COVID times and now are doing remote access, they put on seminars at their would-be luncheons, and they may be interested in this as a seminar. They've done them on such things as opportunity zones and other, so consider that as a possible avenue.
The chamber's been doing that as well, so. I thought about, Unite Oregon City, and I was trying to think of any other possible community groups that are organized at this point. We'll throw that out. If we think of anything else, we'll just throw that to you.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just in terms of the general questions that we're looking to pose, and some of these will form a sort of stakeholder questionnaire or a preliminary questionnaire that will accompany the next week's community meeting as well. But the idea here is to get a general sense of people's feelings and issues, ideas, what have you. So it's deliberately broad, ranging from, do you have any questions about urban renewal, what it does? So getting to that educational piece, what we need to address. Are you familiar with the district? Do you think it's a tool that you should consider using in the future? If it was a tool that was used, what types of projects would you like to see? And is there anything else you'd like to share? So, of course, this is an early list of questions aimed to get at really what we need to be addressing going forward. So we'll build on this. It will get more specific. It will get more targeted. But just to maintain that neutrality as well, it's deliberate. In terms of the
a moment, sir.
tax and
Sam,
go ahead.
Commissioner McGriff.
I know those are just a few of the questions you're contemplating, so is there a question being thought about that says, so you say, do you think urban renewal is a tool they should consider using in the future? If they say no, is there a question that says, well, what do you think that the city of Oregon City could use as a tool for development? Or, I mean, there's going to be some people who are, what I'm concerned about is you got the first question, then you've got the second question, which is in a little bit seeming like a predetermined answer. You're asking them already about what type of projects would you like to see, and to me, that's a question that's further down the road. It's not a question, it's not a beginning question, because if they say no, then there needs to be some option for, well, what is an alternative to it? I mean, again, we're trying to be, we want to be broad, but we don't want to predetermine that this is the only answer. It may be in the end when we get done, but I don't want that to be seen up front as that we are front loading it. And that just seems like that, what types of projects would you like to see, seems a little bit of a front loaded question.
Noted. We will, we'll absolutely, we'll address that and put it out to the commission, prior to any questioning going out.
Quite honestly, those are,
So I do want to move.
Yes.
we have specialized knowledge here, and I'm not sure, it's not for us to tell you how to do your job.
No, just,
And at some point, we'll get to those very specific questions like the influence on a fire district, the influence on the school system, you know, those kind of things, and how you arrive at that, that's your task.
Right.
And we leave that to you.
So that's a good segue, because there are some questions about the specific impacts that we will be prepared to, or are prepared to speak to during our interviews with the taxing districts, because that will obviously be a primary concern of theirs. So there are a set of questions that we'll be asking, such as these, that won't be put to the general public, because they are specific to the taxing districts and their financial structure. So there are, we are already doing some of that financial analysis to figure out exactly what those impacts are. And Andy Parks has done a great job. He's not on the line today, but if he were, he would speak to those. And that will form a part of one of our presentations to you, the commission, and things that we speak to later down the line. I realize that last question can be struck as well, because it speaks to meeting with a board. So we will just do that.
no, I think that's a good question for specifics.
Mm-hmm.
with
Right.
those taxing districts.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment just to state that, let the record show that Commissioner Rocky Smith has joined the meeting. Thank you.
So moving on, I want to hand over to Annie. So there's a fair few things to talk about and present. They've been working hard behind the scenes to get everything up together, and our first community meeting is right around the corner, next Thursday, 6 to 7:30, held remotely. So with that, I'll hand over to Anais.
Thank you, Sam. Appreciate everyone having me. So as Sam had noted, there's quite a number of things happening all simultaneously. Not only are we conducting the stakeholder interviews and preparing for presentations to various community groups, we are also launching our first community meeting. As Sam mentioned, it will be next Thursday evening from 6 to 7:30. It will be a virtual community workshop. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the community workshop is primarily education, and then to start delving into some of these broad questions that we noted just a couple slides earlier. So purpose is to present urban renewal facts and an overview of the project. So here we are doing some education, some outreach, and just some general understanding of what is this process and why we're doing it. And our objectives for this meeting are to establish some values and identify some of the concerns and issues, benefits, impacts, etc., and then start slowly segueing into maybe potential project types if urban renewal were to be something you're moving forward with. Next slide. So I heed your comment about thinking strategically around a third or fourth question here. These are those three broad questions that we started out with. So, you know, after a presentation about urban renewal and what it does, we want to open up the floor and ask if anybody has any questions about urban renewal and any of the details that we presented or how it is used. So just more education and back and forth there. And then talking about, you know, based on this information and the pros and cons, is urban renewal a tool that the city should consider using in the future? And then if this was a tool that the city would use, what types of projects would you like to see it dedicated towards? So I definitely heed your suggestion at including maybe a third question there that doesn't necessarily lead to a decision about having projects for urban renewal, but maybe a question that asks what other alternatives could people think of when it comes to catalyzing development. So that was a brief overview of just kind of what the general meeting will be laid out. In terms of the promotion and speaking to the question about social media, we have some content and some language pulled together that we will be putting out through an e-blast, as well as through our social media channel. So the city has an active Facebook and Instagram account, so we've got some language for that. They'll be promoting the meeting next week, and then we're hoping that the e-blast will be kind of a combination of targeted invites to a variety of different groups and organizations, as well as general city-wide listservs. So the hope is that the message will go out loud and clear. At the same time, we've been actually prepping quite a number of materials for all of this to be pulled together. So, you know, when you have a meeting and stakeholder interviews, you need a website, you need some fact sheets and some overview pages. So we've done a number of things to pull together information in certain places that are accessible to the general public. So the next couple of items in our presentation to you deal primarily with just a quick overview of some of the materials that we've been preparing, both to aid us in our stakeholder interviews and to aid us in our community presentations, as well as for just general public consumption online. So, Sam, I think the next couple of slides is just the general slide deck that we've pulled together. Oh, I'm sorry, never mind. Before we do that, I'll speak to a couple of the other activities that are coming up. So, in addition to our community workshop next Thursday, what we will also do at the same time is take those general questions, albeit modified a little bit after this meeting, and format it into an online questionnaire so that folks that aren't able to show up next Thursday are still able to provide feedback through that online survey. So we'll probably have that live for about a week or two around the date of the community workshop. And that will be kind of the strategy, is to have some sort of alternative engagement activity where folks can share their input if they aren't able to make it to one of our workshops. So that will be coming up next. We will also be speaking to, as I mentioned, we'll be doing a series of community group presentations, you know, kind of discussion groups, generally along the same lines as those previous broad-based questions. In addition, we are also going to be helping organize a series of town halls, which will essentially be an opportunity for you as commissioners to check in and see if, you know, basically have open office hours. And if people have questions, have gone through all the materials that we provided online and want to chat with someone kind of one-on-one about the details of urban renewal, we'll be having these kind of drop-in open office hour times for all of you to take part in, and then for us to be there to also provide and share information and answer questions as they arise. And this will all lead us to our second community meeting, which will likely occur at the end or just right before the holidays. So there's quite a bit going on between now and the end of the year.
Do you have any
So the
intention,
next question.
a quick moment, do you have any intention of interviewing commissioners like individually by phone for their perspective?
Sam, do you want to speak to that?
Do you have any intention of,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't know if you heard the question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I was just unmuting myself. Takes a minute. So I know that the commission had mentioned that an interest previously in being, you know, very much part of everything, which is totally intentional and I think designed in the way that this is sort of scoped out. We have a limited number of sort of available interviews, but I think what we could probably do is if there were a certain number of commissioners that really wanted to you know, speak candidly and provide their opinion, then we would make space for those conversations. I think we probably have the capacity to do that. Maybe not as an entire team, but you know, one-on-one with one or two of us at any given point. Maybe so we can get into the technicalities. We could have Andy Parks involved in those. I guess the question to you is, are there, from your perspective, certain commissioners that would be more inclined to do that rather than others?
I'm sure Commissioner Denise McGriff would like to. You know, on my behalf, I would be satisfied submitting to you an email list of specific questions. There would be hot button issues that you will face. And it's nice to get ahead of it.
That would be much appreciated. I think that's a good approach, and any information that could be provided is appreciated. So
You would like to do the same?
Yeah, I think,
So both Doug Neely and myself would like to just maybe submit a list of hot button questions to your attention. So I don't have your email, but mine is obviously there. We can get it. You can get mine. FO'Donnell@orcity.org.
We can just send it to James.
Okay, send it to James.
I promise I'll wear my urban renewal t-shirt.
We'll use, James can be the clearinghouse. He can send it to us. Okay, sorry to interrupt your presentation. Please, let's try to wrap her up in the next 10 minutes.
absolutely. So there's we have a Urban Renewal 101 slide deck that we wanted to run through, and I know in the just to keep this really quick, this is basically what we're going to front load the community meeting with. And you know, there will be some tweaks, but generally speaking, this is the flow and the content. We'll try and pretty it up, make it a little bit more picture-heavy, but essentially, this is what we're going to present. This is the way we describe the study that you have in the FAQ document that's included. But we'll present what the study is, what is urban renewal, just a very high level. How is it financed? Get into the fact, just a quick overview of what really tax increment financing means and how it works. When does it make sense to use urban renewal, or when do urban renewal agencies and cities typically look to urban renewal as a tool? What can it pay for? So the projects, whether that's utility and infrastructure projects, development assistance grants, parks, plazas, public buildings, other stuff. And then we'll give a very brief overview of how Oregon City has used urban renewal in the past. Up to this point, we know that it's been relatively limited in terms of the overall plan perspective, but there are some things that it's been used for, and then some before and after shots that many people may be familiar with, but it's always good to refamiliarize. So Main Street, McLaughlin, Boulevard, the Amtrak station, Clackamas Cove, Trail, that is, and others. And then, what are the districts? How far does this go? Give a quick overview of that. This needs some work, but this is just the potential projects that are still in the plan. So depending on our decision to maybe replace that question about projects, this may go for a later date. But otherwise, if it stays, it'll look much different to this. But we'll talk a little bit about potential projects. Included in those projects, obviously, I think the most well-known are probably Clackamas Cove and Rossman Landfill, which both are largely incomplete and not necessarily going to happen in the future either. So we were planning to include that. And then we would just follow that with that back and forth that Annie's mentioned to answer questions, delve a little bit more into detail about any other information that people wanted to get into, and follow that up with the online survey.
And then to support our community meeting, and then also to just have general materials. I think in your packets you received kind of a Opus FAQ sheet for urban renewal. So we did our best to distill some of the key points from that FAQ sheet into a more easily digestible fact sheet. Next slide, Sam, please. One before.
Oh, I can.
Or after, yeah. So this is just our effort at trying to distill information and provide it in a variety of formats, just a little bit more approachable. And then in addition, we've also just launched a website. It's not completely live yet, but we do have a website where we will be posting information like the FAQ sheet and the fact sheet, as well as a video recording of our community meeting and the slide deck. So we're really going to try and use the website as kind of a platform for all of these materials. So everything is at people's fingertips, and then we will be very available to continue in discussions and answering questions about urban renewal. And that just concludes just a brief overview of the materials we've been pulling together for all of these concurrent activities.
I would simply say that, all options are on the table. We can use the existing UR district as an example, but we're willing to do everything and anything. And what forms can future urban renewal districts take? Can they be in the form of a donut? Can they be non-connected islands under the same district? Those kind of questions they're more than just the basics of urban renewal, but at some point we're going to want to discuss them. So I will.
Yeah.
Any further questions from anyone present or our presenters?
It's a great beginning. Thank you.
It is, and as we said before, it's not a marketing device; it's an educational device. So let's approach it that way. So you both have our thanks for presenting tonight. Our thanks to my fellow commission members, and at that point, we'll bring this part of the presentation to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Communications piece, anything, Mr. Conkle?
Not tonight, sir, thank you.
Anything from my fellow commission members? Seeing nothing, I believe we can adjourn. Thank you.